The riverboat lurched violently to the left, throwing Helena Owens against the railing as screams erupted from the deck below. And in that terrible moment, she knew her entire future was about to sink into the Mississippi River along with everything she owned. The year was 1873, and she had traveled all the way from Boston to New Orleans, carrying her mother's wedding dress, her father's pocket watch, and letters from the man she had agreed to marry sight unseen in a dusty Texas town called San Antonio. The steamboat's boiler had exploded without warning, tearing through the lower deck and sending passengers scrambling in every direction as smoke billowed into the late afternoon sky. Helena grabbed onto the railing with both hands, her knuckles white as the boat tilted further. Water was already pouring through the breach in the hull, and she could hear the terrifying sound of wood splintering beneath her feet. Other passengers were jumping into the murky water, their cries mixing with the hiss of steam and the groaning of the dying vessel. She had no time to think, only to act. Helena kicked off her heavy boots and climbed over the railing, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The water looked dark and dangerous, but staying on the boat meant certain death. She took a deep breath and jumped, plunging into the cold embrace of the Mississippi. The current was stronger than she had anticipated, pulling her downstream as she fought to keep her head above water. Her dress wrapped around her legs like iron chains, dragging her down. She struggled with the buttons, finally managing to free herself from the outer layers, leaving her in just her chemise and petticoat. Around her, other passengers were thrashing in the water, some clinging to debris, others already floating face down. Helena grabbed onto a piece of wooden paneling that floated past, holding on for dear life as the current swept her away from the sinking boat. She could see the shoreline, but it seemed impossibly far away. Her arms ached, and her lungs burned as she kicked her legs, trying to propel herself and the makeshift flotation device toward land. Time lost all meaning. It could have been minutes or hours before her feet finally touched the muddy bottom of the river. She dragged herself onto the shore, collapsing in the tall grass as her body shook with exhaustion and shock. Everything was gone. Her trunk with all her possessions, her money, the letters from Austin Xavier, the man who was supposed to be waiting for her in San Antonio. Even the locket with her mother's portrait that she had worn around her neck had been torn away by the river. Helena lay there as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She had nothing left except the soaked undergarments clinging to her body and the air in her lungs. She was somewhere along the Mississippi River, miles from New Orleans, with no way to continue her journey and no way to go back home. Boston seemed like another world now, a place she had left behind with such hope and determination just weeks ago. As darkness fell, Helena forced herself to stand. She could not stay here by the river all night. She needed to find help, find shelter, find something. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from what might be a homestead or a small settlement. With no other options, she began walking, her bare feet sinking into the soft earth with each step. The homestead turned out to be a small farm belonging to an elderly couple who took pity on her bedraggled state. They gave her a simple dress that had belonged to their deceased daughter, fed her hot soup, and let her sleep in their barn. The next morning they told her that the nearest town was Vicksburg, Mississippi, about 10 miles north. They had little money themselves, but offered her a ride on their wagon when they went to sell eggs the following week. Helena could not wait that long. She thanked them profusely for their kindness, accepted a small bundle of food they insisted she take, and set out walking. Her feet were already blistered and sore, but she had no choice. She had to reach Vicksburg, had to find some way to earn money, had to figure out how to get to Texas. The road to Vicksburg was long and dusty. Other travelers passed her on horseback or in wagons, most of them giving her curious looks but not stopping. A woman traveling alone was unusual, especially one who looked as disheveled as Helena surely did. By the time she reached Vicksburg, her feet were bleeding, and she was dizzy from heat and exhaustion. The town was bustling with activity, still rebuilding from the devastation of the war that had ended 8 years earlier. Helena wandered through the streets, overwhelmed by the noise and the crowds. She needed work, any kind of work, but she had no references, no connections, and no proper shoes. A kindly woman who ran a boarding house finally took pity on her. Mrs. Thornton listened to Helena's story with sympathetic eyes and offered her a position helping with the laundry and cleaning in exchange for room and board. The pay was minimal, but Helena accepted gratefully. At least she would have a roof over her head while she figured out her next move. For 3 weeks, Helena worked from dawn until dark, scrubbing sheets and floors until her hands were raw. She saved every penny she earned, keeping the coins hidden in a small pouch she wore tied around her waist beneath her dress. Mrs. Thornton was kind but firm, and the work was exhausting, but Helena was determined. She had to get to San Antonio. She had to find Austin Xavier. One evening, as she was hanging sheets in the yard behind the boarding house, she overheard 2 men talking about a cattle drive heading west. They were planning to leave in a few days, taking a herd from Mississippi all the way to the railroad in Texas. The route would pass through Louisiana and eventually reach San Antonio. Helena's heart leaped at the possibility. If she could somehow join that cattle drive, she could make it to Texas without having to pay for a train ticket or a stage coach. But would they allow a woman to travel with them? She knew it was a long shot, but she had to try. The next morning she asked Mrs. Thornton where she might find the men organizing the cattle drive. The older woman gave her a skeptical look, but told her they were likely at the stockyards on the edge of town. Helena waited until her morning chores were finished, then hurried to the stockyards, her heart pounding with nervous anticipation. The stockyards were a chaos of bawling cattle, shouting men, and dust that hung thick in the air. Helena asked several workers where she might find the trail boss, and they directed her to a tall man with sun-weathered skin and a wide-brimmed hat standing near the largest corral. As she approached, she got her first good look at him. He was probably in his late 20s, with broad shoulders and lean muscles that spoke of years of hard work. His face was angular and strong, with a straight nose and a firm jaw darkened by several days' worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking shade of gray-blue that seemed to see right through her when he turned to face her. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice was deep and measured with a slight Texas drawl. Helena straightened her shoulders, trying to appear more confident than she felt. "Are you the trail boss for the cattle drive heading to Texas?" "I am, Austin Xavier." He tipped his hat slightly. "What business do you have with a cattle drive?" "I need to get to San Antonio," Helena said, the words tumbling out faster than she intended. "My ship sank, I lost everything, and I have no money for passage. I can work for my way, I can cook, I can help with whatever needs doing. Please, I just need to get to Texas." Austin studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "A cattle drive is no place for a lady. It is dangerous work, long days, sleeping on the ground. We will be traveling through rough country for weeks." "I am not afraid of hard work," Helena said firmly. "And I have nowhere else to turn. I will do whatever it takes." Something in her voice, or perhaps the desperation in her eyes, must have reached him because Austin's stern expression softened slightly. "What is your name?" "Helena Owens." "Miss Owens, I appreciate your situation, truly I do. But I have 10 men on this drive, and adding a woman to the mix would be complicated. I will stay out of the way, Helena insisted. I will earn my keep, I promise you. I can cook better than any cowboy, I am certain of that. Your men would appreciate hot meals instead of beans and hardtack. Austin almost smiled at that. You might have a point there. He was quiet for another moment, clearly weighing his options. Where are you from originally? Boston. I was supposed to marry a man in San Antonio. He arranged for me to come west as his bride, but then the riverboat sank and I lost everything, including the letters with his address. His name. Helena felt her cheeks flush. That is the problem. There were several men who had written to me through the matrimonial agency. I had finally decided on one, but all the letters went down with the boat. I remember his name was Austin, like yours, and I believe his surname started with an X. I was supposed to meet him in San Antonio, and he was supposed to recognize me from the photograph I sent, but of course, that is gone too now. Austin's eyebrows rose and he looked at her with renewed interest. Austin with a surname starting with X in San Antonio. Yes. Do you know many people there? Miss Owens, I think we need to have a longer conversation, but not here. He gestured toward the road leading back into town. There is a decent restaurant on Main Street. Would you join me for supper this evening? I will pay, of course. Helena was taken aback by the invitation. I do not understand. Does this mean you will let me join the cattle drive? It means I want to hear more of your story. Meet me at the Riverside restaurant at 6 o'clock. Can you do that? She nodded, confused but hopeful. Yes, I will be there. Austin tipped his hat again. Until this evening, then, Miss Owens. Helena walked back to the boarding house in a daze. Why had he suddenly become so interested in her story, and why had he invited her to supper? She tried not to let her hopes rise too high. Perhaps he just wanted to let her down gently, away from the rough environment of the stockyards. That evening, she borrowed a better dress from Mrs. Thornton and did her best to tame her auburn hair into a respectable style. The older woman gave her a knowing look but said nothing, simply wished her good luck. The Riverside restaurant was nicer than any place Helena had eaten since leaving Boston. Austin was already there, waiting at a table by the window. He had cleaned up as well, his face freshly shaved and his hair still damp from washing. He stood when she approached and pulled out her chair. "Thank you for coming," he said as they both sat down. "I hope you are hungry. The food here is actually quite good." They ordered, and then Austin leaned back in his chair, studying her again with those penetrating blue-gray eyes. "Miss Owens, I am going to tell you something that might come as quite a shock. My full name is Austin Daniel Xavier. I live on a ranch outside San Antonio, Texas. And 6 months ago, I wrote to a matrimonial agency in Boston seeking a bride." Helena felt the blood drain from her face. "You are the man I was supposed to marry. It would seem so. I received several responses, but one stood out. The woman was educated, well-spoken, and her photograph showed a beautiful young woman with auburn hair and green eyes. She wrote about her love of books and her desire for adventure. Her name was Helena Owens." "That was me," Helena whispered. "But you were supposed to be waiting in San Antonio." "How are you here in Vicksburg?" "I had business here, buying cattle to take back to my ranch. The drive is heading home, not to the railhead. When you said you were looking for an Austin with a surname starting with X in San Antonio, I thought it might be too much of a coincidence. But when you mentioned the matrimonial agency and described your circumstances exactly as they appeared in the newspapers yesterday, mentioning the riverboat disaster, I knew it had to be you." Helena could barely process what she was hearing. "So all this time, While I have been desperately trying to figure out how to get to Texas, you have been right here. It would appear so." Austin's expression was serious but not unkind. "The question now is, what do we do about it?" The waiter brought their food, but Helena barely noticed. Her mind was racing with the implications of this incredible coincidence. "You were expecting a mail-order bride. Are you still interested in that arrangement?" Austin was quiet for a moment, cutting his steak methodically. "Miss Owens, I wrote to that agency because I am 30 years old and running a ranch does not leave much time for courting. I wanted a wife, a partner, someone to build a life with. But I always hoped that even in an arranged marriage, there might be the possibility of genuine affection growing between us." "I felt the same way," Helena admitted. "I lost my parents 2 years ago. I had no other family and Boston had become lonely. When I read your letters, you seemed kind and honest. I thought perhaps we could build something real together. Then perhaps we should start over." Austin set down his knife and fork and extended his hand across the table. "Miss Helena Owens, my name is Austin Xavier. I am very pleased to make your acquaintance." Helena felt a smile tugging at her lips for the first time in weeks. She placed her hand in his, feeling the calloused warmth of his palm. "Mr. Xavier, the pleasure is mine." They ate dinner and talked for hours, sharing stories and getting to know each other in a way that letters could never accomplish. Helena told him about her life in Boston, her parents' death from influenza, and the loneliness that had driven her to seek a new beginning out west. Austin spoke of his ranch, the 500 acres he had worked hard to build from nothing, and his dreams of raising the finest cattle in Texas. "I should warn you," Austin said as the evening drew to a close, "the ranch is fairly isolated. The nearest town is San Antonio, which is about 15 miles away. It is not an easy life, and there are none of the conveniences you would have had in Boston." "I am not afraid of hard work or isolation," Helena said, "but I do have one concern. We have only just met, truly met tonight. You were prepared to marry a stranger based on letters and a photograph. I was prepared to do the same. But now that we are here, face to face, should we not take some time to be certain this is what we both want?" Austin nodded slowly. "That is a fair and wise suggestion. Here is my proposal. You travel with the cattle drive back to San Antonio as my guest, not as a hired hand. That will give us several weeks to know each other better. When we reach the ranch, you can stay in the main house. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who will provide proper chaperoning. If, after spending time together, we both still wish to proceed with the marriage, we will do so. If either of us has doubts, you will have safe passage wherever you wish to go with enough money to start fresh. Does that seem fair?" Helena felt relief wash over her. He was giving her a choice, not forcing her into an arrangement just because she was desperate. "That seems more than fair. Thank you, Mr. Xavier. Please call me Austin. If we are to potentially marry, we should at least be on a first-name basis. Then you must call me Helena." They smiled at each other across the table, and Helena felt a flutter of something in her chest. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of possibility. Austin was handsome, certainly, but more than that, he had been kind to her. He had offered her help without demanding anything in return, and he was treating her with respect and consideration. Over the next 2 days, Austin made arrangements for Helena to join the cattle drive. He bought her proper traveling clothes, including sturdy boots, a split riding skirt, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect her from the sun. He also purchased a gentle mare named Daisy for her to ride. "You do know how to ride, don't you?" he asked as he showed her the horse. "I learned as a girl, though it has been a few years." Helena stroked Daisy's soft nose and the mare nickered gently. "She is beautiful." She has a good temperament. She will take care of you." The morning they left Vicksburg, Helena felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The cattle drive consisted of Austin as trail boss, 10 cowhands of various ages, a chuck wagon driven by an older man named Cookie, and now Helena. The Cowboys had been skeptical when Austin introduced her, but he had made it clear that she was to be treated with the utmost respect, and his word was law. The first few days were difficult. Helena's body ached from long hours in the saddle, and she was not used to sleeping on the hard ground. But she refused to complain. She helped Cookie with meal preparation, learning how to cook over an open fire and make coffee strong enough to strip paint. The Cowboys gradually warmed to her, appreciating the improvement in their meals and her willingness to work. Austin rode near her often, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the country they were passing through. They crossed into Louisiana, following old cattle trails that wound through forests and across rivers. At night, after the cattle were settled and the men were gathered around the campfire, Austin would sit beside her, and they would talk quietly about everything and nothing. Helena learned that Austin had come to Texas when he was just 18, determined to make his fortune. He had worked for other ranchers for years, saving every penny until he had enough to buy his own land. Building the ranch had been backbreaking work, but he had done it, acre by acre, head of cattle by head of cattle. "Why did you never marry before?" Helena asked one evening as they sat watching the stars. Austin was quiet for a moment. "I suppose I was always too focused on building something substantial first. My own father had nothing, and we struggled my whole childhood. I did not want to bring a wife into poverty. I wanted to have something to offer, a real home, a stable life. By the time I had built the ranch to where I wanted it, I realized I had no idea how to meet a respectable woman. Most of the women in San Antonio were already spoken for, and I am not much for fancy social occasions." "So you wrote to the matrimonial agency. It seemed practical, and when I received your letters, when I saw your photograph, I thought perhaps it was meant to be." He turned to look at her, his face half in shadow from the firelight. "I never imagined that you would nearly die getting here, or that I would meet you by pure chance in Mississippi." "Maybe it was fate," Helena said softly. "Maybe we were always supposed to find each other, just not in the way we planned." Austin reached out and gently took her hand. "Maybe so." As the days turned into weeks, Helena found herself falling for Austin in ways she had not anticipated. It was not just his handsome face or his strong, capable hands, though those certainly did not hurt. It was the way he was patient with her when she struggled, the way he made sure she had the best spot near the fire at night, the way he listened when she spoke as if her words truly mattered. It was the way he looked at her sometimes, with an expression that made her heart skip a beat. They crossed into Texas, and the landscape began to change. The air grew drier, and the vegetation became more sparse. Austin pointed out the Sabine River as they crossed it, explaining that they were now on his home territory. One evening, about a month into the drive, a storm rolled in fast and fierce. The cattle grew restless, and the Cowboys had to work frantically to keep them from stampeding. Helena took shelter under the chuck wagon with Cookie, but she could see Austin out in the chaos, riding hard to turn the herd. A bolt of lightning struck close by, and several cattle broke away from the group, running in panic. Austin wheeled his horse around to chase them, but one of the steers turned suddenly, and his horse reared. Helena watched in horror as Austin was thrown from the saddle, landing hard on the ground. Without thinking, Helena ran out into the storm. Cookie shouted for her to come back, but she ignored him. She reached Austin just as he was trying to sit up, rain pouring down his face. "Are you hurt?" she shouted over the thunder. I am fine, just got the wind knocked out of me." He winced as he tried to stand, and Helena slipped her arm around his waist to support him. Together, they stumbled back to the relative safety of the chuck wagon. Later, after the storm had passed and the cattle were settled again, Austin found Helena sitting alone, staring at the clearing sky. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "That was a foolish thing you did, running out in the storm like that," he said, but his voice was gentle. "You were hurt. I could not just sit there and do nothing." Austin turned to face her fully, reaching up to brush a strand of damp hair from her face. "Helena, I need to tell you something. These past weeks, getting to know you, riding beside you, talking with you every evening, it has been the best time of my life. You are everything I hoped you would be and more. You are brave and strong and kind. You make me laugh. You challenge me. And I have realized that I do not want to wait until we reach the ranch to know how I feel." Helena's breath caught in her throat. "How do you feel?" "I am falling in love with you. Maybe I already have fallen. I know we agreed to take our time to make sure this was right, but I am sure. I have never been more sure of anything." His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb gently stroking her skin. "Tell me you feel it too. Tell me I am not alone in this." "You are not alone," Helena whispered. "Austin, I feel it too. I was so scared tonight when you fell. All I could think was that I could not lose you, not when I have only just found you." Austin leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Helena did not want to pull away. She tilted her face up to meet his, and when their lips touched, it was like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but then Austin's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, and Helena melted into him. She had been kissed before, chased pecks from suitors in Boston, but nothing like this. This kiss was full of promise and passion and a future unfolding before them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Austin rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Helena." Not because of letters or arrangements or practicality. "Marry me because you want to, because you love me as I love you." "Yes," Helena said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, Austin, I will marry you." They sat there under the stars, wrapped in each other's arms, while around them, the camp settled into sleep. Helena thought about how just weeks ago she had lost everything, had been drowning in the Mississippi River with no hope and no future. And now she was here, in the arms of a man she loved, with everything she could ever want laid out before her. The rest of the journey passed in a blur of happiness. The cowboys noticed the change between Austin and Helena, the way they rode side by side, the way Austin kept finding excuses to touch her hand or smile at her. Cookie, who had become quite fond of Helena, approved wholeheartedly. Finally, after 6 weeks on the trail, they reached the outskirts of San Antonio. Austin pointed toward the horizon where the town sprawled in the distance. "We will stop there first to sell the cattle and gather supplies. Then it is another few hours to the ranch." San Antonio was bigger than Helena had expected. A bustling town that still carried traces of its Spanish heritage in the architecture and the names of the streets. After the cattle were sold and the cowboys paid, Austin took Helena to a small church on the plaza. "I know you probably imagined a bigger wedding," Austin said as they stood outside, "but I do not want to wait any longer. Will you marry me today, right now?" Helena laughed, feeling giddy with joy. "I do not need a big wedding, Austin. I just need you." They were married that afternoon by a kindly priest who did not ask too many questions about the hasty ceremony. Cookie and 2 of the cowhands served as witnesses. Helena wore a simple white dress that Austin had bought for her that morning, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that one of the cowboys had picked. It was not the elaborate wedding she might have dreamed of as a girl in Boston, but it was perfect. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Austin kissed her with such tenderness and love that Helena felt her heart might burst. They were married. After everything she had been through, all the loss and fear and uncertainty, she was finally where she was meant to be. Austin had reserved a room at the finest hotel in San Antonio for their wedding night. As they climbed the stairs to their room, Helena felt nervousness mixing with excitement. She knew what was expected on a wedding night, though her knowledge was somewhat vague, based on hushed conversations with married friends and a rather cryptic talk her mother had given her years ago. Austin must have sensed her nervousness because once they were inside the room, he simply took her hands in his. "Helena, we do not have to rush anything. We have the rest of our lives together." "I know," Helena said, looking up into his eyes. "I am not afraid, Austin. I am your wife now, and I want to be your wife in every way." What followed was tender and sweet, Austin's gentleness putting her at ease as he showed her the physical expression of the love they shared. Afterwards, lying in his arms in the soft hotel bed, Helena felt a completeness she had never known before. She traced her fingers over Austin's chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palm. "Are you happy?" Austin asked, his voice rumbling in his chest. "I am happier than I ever thought possible," Helena answered honestly. "When that boat was sinking, when I thought I might die in that river, I never could have imagined that just weeks later I would be here, married to a man I love with all my heart." Austin tightened his arms around her. "You still have me, Helena, and you always will. No matter what challenges we face, no matter what storms come our way, we will face them together." "Together," Helena echoed, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "I like the sound of that." The next morning they set out for the ranch. Austin had sent the cowboys ahead the day before with instructions to prepare the house for their arrival. As they rode, Austin pointed out various landmarks, telling Helena stories about the land and the work it had taken to build his ranch from nothing. When they crested a final hill, Austin stopped and gestured ahead. "There it is, home." Helena looked down at the valley spread out before them. The ranch house was larger than she had expected, a sturdy two-story structure built from local stone and timber. There was a big barn, several corrals, and other outbuildings. She could see cattle grazing in the distance and horses in one of the nearer pastures. "It is beautiful, Austin," Helena breathed. "It is yours now, too," Austin said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Everything I have is yours." As they rode down toward the house, a small woman emerged onto the porch. She was Chinese, probably in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She shaded her eyes against the sun and then broke into a broad smile when she recognized Austin. "Mrs. Chen," Austin called out as they dismounted. "I am home, and I have brought someone very special." Mrs. Chen hurried down the steps, her smile widening as she looked at Helena. "This is the bride, but I thought she was not coming until next month." There were some complications, but everything worked out in the end. Austin put his arm around Helena's waist. "Mrs. Chen, this is my wife, Helena. We were married yesterday in San Antonio." "Married already?" Mrs. Chen clapped her hands together in delight. "This is wonderful news." Come inside. I've kept the house ready, hoping you would bring your bride home soon." The interior of the house was simple but comfortable. The main room had a large stone fireplace, handmade furniture, and windows that let in generous amounts of light. Mrs. Chen had clearly been working hard, as everything was spotlessly clean and there were fresh flowers in vases on the tables. "I will show you the rest of the house," Austin said, leading Helena through the rooms. There was a kitchen with a good stove, a dining room, a study, and upstairs, 3 bedrooms. The master bedroom was spacious, with a large bed covered in a colorful quilt and more windows overlooking the ranch. Mrs. Chen made that quilt as a wedding present, Austin explained. I told her months ago that I was hoping to marry. Helena ran her hand over the beautiful stitching. It is lovely. She is very talented. Over the next weeks, Helena settled into her new life as a rancher's wife. Mrs. Chen taught her how to manage the household, everything from preserving food to making soap to keeping the ranch accounts. Helena discovered she had a knack for organization, and she began implementing systems that made the ranch run more efficiently. She also learned to truly ride, not just the basic skills she had known but real horsemanship. Austin was patient with her, teaching her how to work with the cattle, how to mend fences, and how to handle all the myriad tasks that came with running a ranch. Helena loved being outdoors, loved the physical work, and loved being beside Austin as they built their life together. The ranch hands were respectful and hardworking. Helena made sure they were well fed, and she took an interest in their lives, learning about their families and their dreams. Cookie had decided to stay on as the ranch cook rather than hiring out for another cattle drive, claiming that Helena's influence had spoiled him for trail cooking. At night, Helena and Austin would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. They would talk about their day, make plans for the future, and simply enjoy being together. And later, in the privacy of their bedroom, they would express their love for each other with a passion that only grew stronger with time. 3 months after their arrival at the ranch, Helena woke one morning feeling queasy. She barely made it to the basin before she was sick, and the retching brought Austin rushing to her side, concern written all over his face. "What is wrong? Are you ill? Should I ride for the doctor?" Helena wiped her mouth with a damp cloth, then turned to look at her husband with a tremulous smile. "I do not think a doctor is necessary, not yet anyway. Austin, I think I am with child." Austin's eyes went wide, and for a moment he seemed frozen. Then a grin spread across his face, so wide and joyful that Helena started laughing. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down again, looking worried. "I am sorry. Should I not have done that? I do not want to hurt you or the baby." "I am pregnant, not fragile," Helena said, still laughing. "But yes, perhaps save the spinning for after the baby is born." Austin placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach, wonder in his eyes. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Helena, you have made me the happiest man alive." Mrs. Chen was equally delighted when they shared the news. She immediately began knitting tiny clothes and giving Helena all sorts of advice, some helpful and some rather peculiar. As the months passed and Helena's belly grew, Austin became increasingly protective. He did not want her working too hard, did not want her riding horses, did not want her doing anything that might pose even the slightest risk. "Austin, women have been having babies since the beginning of time," Helena said with exasperation one day when he insisted she stay inside because it was too hot. "I am not going to break." I know," Austin said, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "I just cannot help but worry. You are the most precious thing in my life, and now you are carrying our child. The thought of anything happening to either of you terrifies me." Helena's heart melted at his words. She took his face in her hands and kissed him softly. "Nothing is going to happen to me or our baby. I promise to be careful, but you have to let me live my life. I did not come all this way to become a prisoner in my own home." They compromised. Helena continued to help with the household and the ranch accounts, but she agreed to leave the heavy work to others. She spent her time sewing baby clothes, preparing a nursery in one of the spare bedrooms, and reading every book about childbirth she could get her hands on. In the early spring of 1874, as wildflowers bloomed across the Texas hills, Helena went into labor. The doctor had been summoned from San Antonio, and he arrived just as the contractions were intensifying. Austin paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal, while inside, Helena labored with Mrs. Chen and the doctor in attendance. It was a long, difficult birth. Helena had not anticipated the sheer intensity of the pain, the way it consumed everything until there was nothing but the next contraction and the desperate need to push. But finally, after hours of struggle, she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, placing the squalling infant on Helena's chest. "A healthy baby boy." Helena looked down at her son, still covered in blood and vernix, and felt such a wave of love that it brought tears to her eyes. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air as he cried. Austin burst into the room, having heard the baby's cries. He stopped dead at the sight of Helena holding their son, his eyes filling with tears. "Come meet your son," Helena said softly. Austin crossed the room and sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring at the baby with awe. "He is so small," he whispered. "He is perfect," Helena corrected. "Austin, meet your son, Henry Xavier." They had chosen the name weeks ago, Henry, after Helena's father. Austin reached out tentatively and touched the baby's tiny hand, and little Henry immediately grasped his father's finger with surprising strength. "Hello, Henry," Austin said, his voice choked with emotion. "I am your father, and I promise to love you and protect you for all the days of my life." The first weeks with Henry were exhausting but wonderful. Helena was grateful for Mrs. Chen's help as she learned to nurse the baby and adjusted to the constant demands of a newborn. Austin was a devoted father, often getting up in the night to bring Henry to Helena for feedings, changing diapers with fumbling but determined hands, and spending every free moment simply watching his son sleep. As Henry grew, his personality began to emerge. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and curious about everything around him. Helena would sit on the porch with him in her lap, pointing out the horses and cattle, telling him stories about the ranch and his father's hard work in building it. When Henry was 6 months old, Helena discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Austin was still overly protective, but he had learned from the first pregnancy to trust that Helena knew her limits. Their second child, a daughter they named Harriet, was born in the winter of 1875. She had Helena's auburn hair and Austin's gray-blue eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she had her father wrapped around her little finger. Where Henry had been an easy baby, Harriet was more demanding, wanting constant attention and cuddles. But Austin never complained, happily walking the floor with her at all hours of the night. The ranch continued to prosper. With Helena's organizational skills and Austin's expertise with cattle, they expanded their operation, bought more land, and hired additional hands. They were becoming one of the most successful ranches in the area, and their reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock spread far and wide. When Henry was 3 and Harriet was nearly 2, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was from Boston, from a lawyer Helena had never heard of. With shaking hands, she opened it and read that a distant cousin she had barely known had died, leaving Helena his entire estate. It was not a massive fortune, but it was substantial, enough money to ensure their children's education and provide security for years to come. Helena showed the letter to Austin that evening as they sat in their bedroom after putting the children to sleep. He read it carefully, then set it aside and looked at her thoughtfully. "This changes things," he said. You are no longer dependent on me or the ranch. With this inheritance, you could have anything you want. You could even return to Boston if you wished, live a life of comfort in the city." Helena stared at him in shock. "Austin, why would I ever want to leave? This is my home, you are my husband, our children are here. Everything I love is right here on this ranch." Austin pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I had to say it, I had to give you the choice. When you first came here, you had nothing, nowhere else to go. I needed you to know that now you do have choices, and if you choose to stay, it is because you truly want to, not because you have no other option." Helena pulled back just far enough to look into his eyes. "Austin Xavier, I chose you the day you told me you loved me during that cattle drive. I chose you again on our wedding day. And I choose you now and every day for the rest of our lives. Not because I have no other options, but because there is no option I want more than building this life with you." Austin kissed her deeply, and Helena felt the same spark of passion that had been there since the beginning. Over the years, their love had not diminished, but had grown deeper and richer, tempered by the challenges they had faced and the joys they had shared. They decided to use the inheritance to build a school closer to the ranch, so their children and the children of their ranch hands would not have to travel all the way to San Antonio for education. They also set aside money for Henry and Harriet's futures, whatever those might hold. The years passed in a blur of activity and growth. Henry grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working alongside his father with the cattle. Harriet was a whirlwind of energy, fearless and adventurous, always getting into some kind of mischief. Helena gave birth to 2 more children, twin boys named Harold and Hugh, who were born when Henry was 7. The ranch house expanded to accommodate their growing family, with additions and improvements that made it more comfortable while maintaining its rustic charm. Mrs. Chen continued to be an invaluable part of their household, and as she aged, Helena hired additional help to ease her workload, ensuring that the older woman could spend her remaining years in comfort and security. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Austin surprised Helena with a trip back to Vicksburg. They left the children in the capable care of Mrs. Chen and the ranch hands, and retraced the route of that long-ago cattle drive. They visited the spot where the riverboat had sunk, now marked with a memorial to those who had lost their lives. Helena stood at the riverbank, holding Austin's hand, and thought about how much had changed since that terrible day. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if the boat had not sunk?" Austin asked quietly. Helena considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But honestly, Austin, I think we would have ended up exactly here. Maybe not by this particular path, but I believe we were meant to find each other. The universe just took a rather dramatic route to bring us together." They spent a week traveling, staying in nice hotels, eating in restaurants, and simply enjoying time alone together. But by the end of the week, they were both eager to return home to their children and the ranch. The adventure had been wonderful, but home was where their hearts truly belonged. As the children grew older, the ranch became even more successful. Henry, now a young man of 18, was already proving to be a skilled rancher in his own right. He had his father's work ethic and his mother's business sense, a combination that served him well. Harriet, at 16, had become an accomplished horsewoman and had started breeding and training horses, adding a new dimension to the ranch's operations. The twins, Harold and Hugh, were 11 and full of mischief, but also showing promise in their own unique ways. Harold loved books and learning, and Helena suspected he might one day leave the ranch to pursue higher education. Hugh, on the other hand, had inherited his sister's fearlessness and his father's strength, and he could rope and ride almost as well as men twice his age. One evening, as Helena and Austin sat on the porch watching the sunset, a tradition they had maintained throughout their marriage. Austin reached over and took her hand. "You remember what I said to you that first night, after the storm during the cattle drive?" he asked. Helena smiled, knowing exactly what he was referring to. "You said I still had you and I always would. You promised we would face everything together. And have we? We have," Helena confirmed. "Every joy, every sorrow, every challenge and triumph, together." Austin lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You know, when I wrote to that matrimonial agency, I was hoping for a companion, someone to share the work of the ranch and maybe give me children. I never imagined I would find the love of my life. I never imagined I would be this happy." "Neither did I," Helena said, her eyes misty with emotion. "When I got on that riverboat in New Orleans, I thought I was going to meet a stranger and try to build a practical arrangement into something resembling affection. I had no idea I was sailing toward everything I had ever wanted." "Even though you lost everything in the river," Helena laughed softly. "I did not lose everything. I only thought I did, because what I found afterwards was so much more valuable than anything that sank with that boat. I found you, Austin. I found love and home and family and purpose. I found everything that truly matters." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky faded from orange to purple to deep blue. The sounds of the ranch settling for the night surrounded them. The lowing of cattle, the whicker of horses, the distant laughter of their children inside the house. "You still have me, Helena," Austin said softly, echoing his words from all those years ago. "And you always will. Until my last breath I am yours." "And I am yours," Helena replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Always and forever." Years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as life always does. They lost Mrs. Chen to old age when she was 72, and the entire household mourned the woman who had been such an integral part of their family. They celebrated as Henry married a lovely young woman from San Antonio and built his own house on the far side of the ranch, staying to work the land alongside his father. Harriet shocked everyone by falling in love with a horse trainer from California who came to learn her methods. After a whirlwind courtship, she married him, and they established their own horse breeding operation on adjacent land, staying close to family while building their own legacy. Harold indeed left the ranch to attend university, eventually becoming a lawyer in San Antonio, but visiting frequently and always maintaining his connection to the land where he had grown up. Hugh took over more and more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch as Austin grew older, proving himself a worthy successor to his father's legacy. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Austin and Helena renewed their vows in the same small church in San Antonio where they had been married all those years ago. Their children and grandchildren filled the pews, along with friends and neighbors from across the region. The priest who married them was the same one who had performed their hasty ceremony a quarter-century earlier, now considerably older but still remembering the young couple who had been so obviously in love. "I have married hundreds of couples in my years as a priest," he said in his brief homily. "But I have never forgotten Austin and Helena Xavier. They came to me with nothing but love for each other and faith in their future. They have built something beautiful together, not just a successful ranch but a true partnership, a real marriage, and a family that exemplifies what love can accomplish. They are an inspiration to us all." As Austin and Helena stood before the altar, renewing the vows they had made 25 years earlier, Helena felt tears running down her cheeks. Austin's hands held hers firmly, his eyes still the same striking gray-blue, though now surrounded by laugh lines and the marks of years spent in the sun. Helena Owens Xavier, Austin said clearly. 25 years ago I promised to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. That was the easiest promise I ever made and the one I am most proud of keeping. You are my partner, my love, my very heart. I thank God every day that your ship sank and brought you into my life. The church erupted in laughter at that, and even Helena had to smile through her tears. It was such a Austin thing to say, finding gratitude even in a tragedy because of where it had ultimately led. Austin Daniel Xavier, Helena said, her voice strong and clear. You gave me everything when I had nothing. You gave me hope when I was despairing, love when I was alone, and a home when I was lost. But more than that, you gave me partnership and respect and friendship along with love. You have been everything I needed and so much more than I ever dared to dream. I love you today as much as I did 25 years ago. No, more, because now our love has been tested and proven true through all the years of our marriage. When they kissed, their children and grandchildren cheered, and Helena felt Austin smile against her lips. After all these years, his kiss still made her heart flutter, still made her feel like a young woman full of hope and possibility. The celebration that followed was joyous and full of life. There was music and dancing and so much food that the tables groaned under the weight of it all. Helena danced with Austin, with each of her sons, and even with her grandchildren, who giggled with delight at having Grandma's attention. As the evening drew to a close, Henry stood up to give a toast. I want to thank my parents for showing all of us what real love looks like, he said, raising his glass. My father always tells the story of how my mother ran out into a storm to help him when he was thrown from his horse, how she risked her own safety for his. But what he does not always mention is that he has done the same for her 1,000 times over the years, in ways both big and small. They have shown us that love is not just a feeling but a choice, one you make every single day. To Austin and Helena Xavier, the best parents and grandparents we could ever hope for, and the finest example of true love any of us have ever witnessed. To Austin and Helena, everyone chorused, raising their glasses. That night, lying in bed in their room at the hotel, the same hotel where they had spent their wedding night 25 years earlier, Helena and Austin held each other close. They were older now, their bodies marked by the years and the hard work of ranch life, but their love had not diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger, deepened by shared experiences, and weathered by the storms they had navigated together. Have you been happy, Helena? Austin asked quietly in the darkness. Truly happy? Helena propped herself up on one elbow so she could see his face in the moonlight streaming through the window. Austin, I have been happier than I ever imagined possible. My life has been everything I could have wanted and so much more. You made me happy. Our children made me happy. The life we built together made me happy. I would not change a single thing. Austin reached up and cupped her face tenderly. When I think about how close I came to never meeting you, how easily we could have missed each other entirely, it terrifies me. If I had not been in Vicksburg that exact day, if you had not come to the stockyard seeking passage, if you had not remembered that your intended was named Austin with a surname starting with X, we might never have found each other. But we did find each other, Helena said firmly. Against all odds, despite every obstacle, we found each other. That has to mean something, Austin. That has to be fate or destiny or divine intervention or whatever you want to call it. We were meant to be together. I believe that, Austin agreed. I have to believe that, because I cannot imagine my life without you. You are woven into every part of who I am. They made love that night with the tenderness and familiarity of long years together, but also with the passion that had always been a part of their relationship. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, completely content. The years continued their steady march forward. Austin eventually handed over most of the ranch operations to Hugh and Henry, though he still rode out every day to check on the cattle and make sure everything was running smoothly. Helena continued to manage the household and the business aspects of the ranch, her mind still sharp even as her body began to slow down. They became great-grandparents multiple times over, watching with joy as their family tree continued to expand and flourish. The ranch remained prosperous, providing good livings for Henry's family and Hugh's family, with enough left over to continue supporting Harriet's horse operation and send any grandchildren who wanted it to university like Harold. On a warm spring day in 1898, exactly 25 years after that anniversary celebration, Austin and Helena sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. Austin was 76 now, and Helena was 70. They moved more slowly than they used to, and their hands showed the marks of long years of work, but they still sat together every evening, still held hands, still shared their thoughts and dreams. "You remember the first time we sat here together?" Austin asked. "You had just arrived at the ranch and I was showing you around." "I remember," Helena said softly. "I was so nervous, wondering if I had made the right choice, if this strange arrangement would work out. And did it work out?" Helena turned to look at her husband, taking in every beloved detail of his weathered face. "It worked out better than I ever could have dreamed, my love. You kept your promise, Austin. You told me I still had you and I always would. And you have been true to that promise every single day of our marriage." Austin lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, just as he had done countless times over the years. "It was the easiest promise I ever made, Helena. Loving you has been the greatest privilege and joy of my life." As the sun set on another day, painting the Texas sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Helena leaned her head on Austin's shoulder and thought about the incredible journey her life had taken. She had lost everything in that river so long ago, every material possession she had owned, every plan she had made. But from that loss had come the greatest gain of her life, a love that had sustained her through joy and sorrow, a family that had brought her endless happiness, and a home that had sheltered not just her body but her very soul. She thought about the frightened young woman she had been, clinging to debris in the Mississippi River, certain that her life was over before it had truly begun. If she could go back and tell that woman what lay ahead, she would have said, "Hold on, keep fighting. The best is yet to come. You are going to lose everything, but you are going to gain so much more. You are going to find a love that will sustain you through a lifetime. You are going to build a family and a legacy. You are going to be happy beyond measure." But that young woman could never have believed it, could never have imagined the fullness and richness that life had in store for her. Some things had to be lived to be understood, had to be experienced to be believed. As darkness fell and the first stars began to appear in the vast Texas sky, Austin helped Helena to her feet, and together they went inside their home, the house they had filled with love and laughter for more than 45 years. Their children and grandchildren would visit tomorrow, filling the house with noise and joy, but tonight it was just the two of them, just as it had been in the beginning. They prepared for bed with the easy synchronicity of long years together, each knowing the other's routines and rhythms without having to think about it. As they settled into bed, Austin pulled Helena close, her back against his chest, his arm around her waist, the way they had slept for 45 years. "I love you, Helena," Austin murmured into her hair. "From the moment I saw you at those stockyards, bedraggled and desperate but still so brave, I started falling in love with you, and I have never stopped." "I love you too, Austin," Helena whispered back. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams." They drifted off to sleep wrapped in each other's arms, two souls so perfectly intertwined that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Outside, the ranch settled into night, cattle lowing softly, horses nickering in their stalls, the land stretching out beneath the stars. And inside, Austin and Helena Xavier slept peacefully, their hearts beating in perfect rhythm, their love as strong and true as it had been on that first day when a desperate woman and a kind cowboy had found each other against all odds. Their story, which had begun with loss and desperation, had become one of the greatest love stories ever told in their corner of Texas, a testament to the power of hope, the strength of commitment, and the enduring nature of true love. When Helena had lost everything in that river, she could never have imagined that she was actually about to gain everything that truly mattered. And Austin, writing letters to a matrimonial agency in search of a practical arrangement, had instead found the love of his life. Years later, when their grandchildren and great-grandchildren asked them about their love story, Austin would always end the tale the same way. "Your grandmother lost everything in that river. But then she found me, and I told her, 'You still have me and you always will.' That is the only promise that ever really mattered, and it is one I kept every day of our lives together." And Helena would always add, smiling at her husband with eyes still full of love, "He did keep that promise." Through everything life threw at us, the good and the bad, the joys and the sorrows, I always had Austin and he always had me. That was all we ever really needed. Love, partnership, and each other. Everything else just flowed from that. Their love story became a legend in San Antonio and the surrounding ranching communities, told and retold as an example of how true love could flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances. The ranch they had built together continued to prosper long after they were gone, maintained by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, each generation adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation that Austin and Helena had laid. The house remained much as they had left it, with photographs covering the walls chronicling their life together. Austin and Helena on their wedding day, looking young and full of hope. Helena holding baby Henry. The whole family gathered for holidays. Austin teaching his sons to rope cattle. Helena surrounded by her grandchildren. Each photograph was a moment frozen in time, a testament to the rich, full life they had lived together. Austin and Helena Xavier lived well into their 80s, finally passing within months of each other, as couples who have been deeply connected often do. Austin went first, peacefully in his sleep one autumn night, and Helena followed him that winter. Their children said she had never quite recovered from losing her other half, though she had lived long enough to make sure all the arrangements were in order and to say goodbye to every member of their large, loving family. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a large oak tree that Austin had planted in their first year there. Their headstone was simple but perfect. Austin and Helena Xavier, beloved husband and wife, parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. They built a love that lasted a lifetime and a legacy that will endure forever. You still have me, and you always will. And so the story of the mail-order bride whose ship sank and the cowboy who told her she still had him came to a close, not with tragedy or loss, but with a life fully lived and a love that had not only survived but thrived. They had faced every challenge together, celebrated every joy together, and built something lasting together. Their love story was not perfect, because no real love story is, but it was true and honest and enduring. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually doorways to the best chapters, that losing everything can sometimes be the beginning of gaining everything that truly matters, and that love, when it is real and true and nurtured with care, can weather any storm and last not just until death but beyond it, living on in the hearts and memories of those who witnessed it. Helena had indeed lost everything that day in the Mississippi River, every material possession she owned. But in the end, she had gained everything that really mattered: a great love, a beautiful family, a home, a purpose, and a life rich with meaning and joy. And Austin had gained the same, finding in his mail-order bride not just a wife but a true partner, a love that transformed his entire existence. Their story served as an inspiration for generations to come, a reminder that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that hope can bloom even from tragedy, and that sometimes the best things in life come to us not through careful planning, but through embracing the unexpected twists and turns of fate. Most importantly, it was a reminder that the most valuable thing we can ever have is not money or possessions, or even security, but the love of another person and the promise to stand by each other through whatever life may bring. You still have me, and you always will. Those simple words, spoken by a cowboy to a desperate woman who had lost everything, had become a promise that shaped two lives and created a legacy that would endure for generations. It was a promise of presence, of commitment, of unwavering support and unconditional love. And it was a promise that Austin and Helena Xavier had kept until their very last breath, creating one of the most beautiful love stories the Wild West had ever known.